Okay, so let's just launch into it. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to take you on a high-level tour of how I use Sharesight. I'll kind of drift between kind of how I set up Sharesight and how I use it on a day-to-day basis. Hopefully I can share with you some tips and tricks that you maybe aren't aware of along the way. But before that, I thought I'd share just a couple of slides just to try to add some context around sort of where we are as an investing public and what a strange and wild ride it's been for all of us. If I could just go to the next slide, I just wanted to refresh the headlines that we were seeing in April. I pulled these from a presentation that I did, much like this one, back when the pandemic was just starting to rage and the markets were really heading into bear territory. The first one there, bank dividend cuts are inevitable with or without APRA's direction. That's quite interesting given that we just saw CBA here in Australia announce their dividend of 98 cents per share and maintain it. Another one, the great lockdown, worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Certainly some of the unemployment numbers we've seen in the States support that claim, although, I don't know, for us share market investors, things have sort of gotten back to normal. Virgin Australia, collapse into administration. We certainly have seen that. They've been in the headlines recently as well. And finally, for any basketball fans out there like myself, I'm originally from Chicago, NBA commissioner, too early to know how basketball will emerge from the pandemic. Well, if you've been following sport, you might know that the NBA is back in full swing in what they're calling a bubble in Disneyland in Florida. And I've been watching that with great interest. So anyway, it's just interesting to kind of look back just a few months ago and see kind of how far we've come, I guess, as a society. If you look at share markets, the ASX 200 is beginning to claw back and has clawed back a lot of ground that it lost. I think at the trough there, it was down around 57%. And as that closed yesterday, it was around 16 or 17% from its high back in February. If you look overseas, the S&P 500, that's made up basically all of the ground that we've lost. And I guess looking at these two charts sort of reminds me personally about the importance of tracking our portfolios and not letting an opportunity pass. I use a financial advisor. He helps me with sort of structuring things and sort of various setup and tax things. I asked him sort of in that bear market range. I said, what do you think? Should I get some more cash to work in the market? And their kind of in-house view is that no, things are going to get really nasty and you should really hold tight and sit on the sidelines for a while. So looking back at these charts, it would seem that perhaps he was incorrect. Looking at this chart, which I like to do, this is from our friends over at Morningstar. This shows a chart going back all the way to 1870. And it shows the drawdown events based on world wars or pandemics back in time. And so if you were to invest $1 all the way back in 1870 and carry that forward to today, that would have been worth $19,000 before the recent downturn. Now that would have dropped to about $15,303, although that would have clawed back a lot of that. But I think my point here is that if you look back over time and you look at some of these drawdowns, you can see that they really have been more severe than the several months that we've just gone through, really to put things kind of in context there. The thing that struck out to me here was Black Monday, 1987, sort of in relation to the lost decade of the 2000s that we've gone through. Now, finally, we do publish and track the top 20 trades by major market index at Sharesight. These are available on our blog. And I just wanted to put up quickly a comparison of the trading patterns that we've seen in April of this year versus August. You can see in April what we saw was a lot of heavy buying into the downturn. The buy trades being orange, the sell trades being the black color there as well. So a lot of buy trades into companies that were really hit hard by the downturn. Although the number one bought and sold security traded amongst our clients was the BetaShares Bear ETF. You can see pretty split there in April, buying and selling. But some heavy buying into Vanguard Aussie shares, heavy buying into some of the major blue chip companies as well. If you shift to August, you can see a sort of more of a split at the top in terms of buys and sells. And what we're seeing consistently is the buy now, pay later stocks of Afterpay and Zip, coming out of the top of our league tables, which is quite interesting. So just thought I'd share that. Again, if you go to our blog, it's on our website. You can see these that we post every week or thereabouts for New Zealand, for the US, and for Australia as well. Okay, so what I'll do now is I will just jump into Sharesight, and I will take you through how I use it. So here we go. So this is a Sharesight account that I maintain that is quite similar to my real portfolio. I guess I sort of change things and mix around some of the numbers just to sort of remain a bit anonymous, I suppose. But I guess what I'm about to show you really holds true to the shares that I own and the way that I use the product. This is an expert plan, and this is an Australian-based account. I say that because that's just important to understand in terms of the features that I have access to and some of the figures you'll see on the screen. As you can probably hear in my voice, I'm an American, although I've been living in Sydney for over 10 years. So my setup is sort of in two camps. It's kind of in my Aussie portfolio and in my US portfolio as well. And I'll kind of show you how I use those as well. Okay, so the first thing that I just want to mention here is just around ensuring your portfolio is set up and it maintains its up-to-dateness, for lack of a better word, going forward. If you're new to Sharesight, you would have loaded up your shares by connecting to your broker, by uploading a CSV file, or doing it manually, which is pretty simple to do. It's actually nice to do it that way. It gives you a good feel as to how the product actually works. But once you've set up your historical trades, please be sure to use our contract note feature, which can be found in the integrations tab. We call this the trade confirmation emails feature. And if you enable this here, what this means, and I've just switched it on just to show you for today, this now means that this portfolio has an inbox. And if you add this email address here to your broker's confirmation page, so if you go into your broker settings, you can add multiple email addresses. So you can have, a trade confirmation sent to you. You can have one sent to your partner or to your accountant, for example. You can add this email address in there as well, and Sharesight will listen for the trade confirmations, and it will update your portfolio automatically. You don't have to log in. You don't have to do a thing. Your portfolio will be updated, and you'll see the new trades as soon as you log in. The really nice part in here as well is that once those trades start to come in, you can actually go back and view what we call the emails inbox, and you can see a list of all of your buy and sell trades and the ones that have been recorded. And if there's been any issues with us processing the files, you'll be alerted to that in there as well. So it's a really great feature, and I would encourage you to give it a shot if you're newer to the platform. Okay, and then just another, I suppose, point worth making here in terms of how you set up Sharesight. We think of Sharesight in terms of portfolios, and the reason that we ask our customers to set up and maintain distinct portfolios is that we also provide tax reporting. That's true for most of our markets, not all. I should mention that if you're dialing in from various parts of the world. But we like to maintain portfolios with respect to the tax entities because people do rely on Sharesight to file their tax or to share access with their accounting professionals when it comes to lodging their tax. And so everything is kind of based on the tax entity going forward. And so in my case, for example, what I do, if I open up this here, I maintain, so in this example, a couple of portfolios, my core portfolio of blue chip stocks, which is an Australian-based portfolio. This is, in this case, a discretionary portfolio that I run here in Australia. So it's denominated in Australian dollars, and along with it come the Australian tax reports. But then, as I'll show you, my coronavirus economy portfolio is a portfolio that I maintain in the US through a US brokerage account that I maintain with Charles Schwab over there. So that's kind of how I organize things from a tax perspective. You can always run consolidated views as well. So total invested wealth is what I've called mine. This allows you to combine all of those portfolios for a performance overlay across all of your assets. And truth be told, when I log into Sharesight, that's typically the first place I go to kind of give a really nice 30,000 foot look across all of my invested shares. You can also see in this case, I have a number of portfolios shared with me. This is a pretty cool feature. You can share access with anybody to your portfolio or vice versa. So if you tend to do some co-investing with some friends of yours, if you are a member of an investment club, you can share portfolios with your mates as well. And then finally, too, if you have the capacity, depending on what plan you're on, again, I'm on the expert plan, so it allows me for 5 portfolios. You can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can also use Sharesight and some extra portfolio capacity to maintain watch lists as well. So this is a watch list that I built some time ago to track the kind of listed performance of the Australian housing market, which is certainly a big topic in this part of the world, as my wife and I were sort of gearing up to buy a house, and I was sort of trying to track what was happening, at least in the listed space, if it could give me any clues as to when we might enter the market. So again, that's just kind of how I structure my portfolios at a very sort of top-end level. A good tip, by the way, if you want to reorganize your portfolios, you can always run what we call an all trades report right here. You can expand that to the lifetime of the portfolio, export it, and then just re-import it as a new portfolio. That'll allow you to shift things around a bit as well. Okay, so what we're looking at here is my core portfolio of blue chip shares. Like many of you, if you come in, the default grouping is typically done by market. So depending on the stock market that you have your investments in, it'll break that down here. So this dictates that we see ASX here, NASDAQ here, and so forth. I like to change that. What I like to do is I like to actually ungroup, which is called do not group in the dropdown. And what this does is it basically declassifies everything. And if I move down, now you can see I've got one big table for all of my investments. And the reason I like to do that is because I can use these column headers to rank. And so the first thing that I always do when I come into Sharesight is I'll click on the return column and I'll rank top to bottom in terms of best performers down to worst performers, right? So you can see in this case that Peloton, which is the exercise bike company that's done very well thanks to the coronavirus lockdown, is the best performing stock in my portfolio, followed by Apple, Zoom, ironically, and Alibaba. And then you can go down to the bottom and examine the laggards as well. So if you don't group your holdings, then you can rank by these column headers to get a quick view as to your leaders and laggards. Additionally, what I like to do after I do that is I like to apply my own custom group. If you haven't done so, custom groups can be set up inside the account settings menu. I'll just show you very quickly my custom groups. This will allow you to build your own asset classification system and apply it across your entire account. So you can set it up once and apply it to multiple portfolios. So what you do is you basically create a new one, you give it a name. And then what Sharesight will do is it'll display a list of all the investments you have, and you simply drag and drop into the groups that you create. So this one actually you can see here is my housing one that I use for my housing watch list. But I'll just switch to my own Doug's asset allocation. And you can kind of see here the way that I like to look at my portfolio throughout Sharesight. So here's my list here of all the investments that I maintain on the system. I've got what I call core large cap, international, China tech, core ETFs, COVID-19, and this is a space for a new category here. Again, you can drag and drop these into any bucket, and then you can rename these as well. So if I just jump back into my blue chip portfolio, and then I switch this to my own asset allocation, just give that a second. You can see now that I have respective performance lines for each of my own customized asset classes. And quickly you can see that whoever's in uncategorized is not helping us out very much. I'll go find that. But you can examine, you can see that you can drag this over time and you can see the performance relative to your benchmark and the other asset classes that you set up. Just out of curiosity, let's go find that uncategorized investment. Ah, yes, Slater and Gordon. Now, I've used that one for tax loss examples, so bear with me. I don't actually own that company, fortunately, but I'll circle back to that and show you how it can impact our capital gains tax report. Okay, so now coming back up to the top, you'll note here too All of the information that follows this bar here, or any of these settings at the top, dictates the calculations that flow down the rest of the page. So at the top of Sharesight, this portfolio value will always be there, but everything below that is dynamic based on the inputs that you put in here. And I mention that because one of the most common questions we get at our support team is that, I don't understand this number, or, maybe it looks incorrect to me. And chances are it's a date range setting issue that you don't realize you've set, or perhaps you're using a different browser and it's gone back to a default setting without you being aware. So just a sort of a housekeeping tip there, FAQ tip. The date range and the settings at the top dictate all the calculations down the bottom of the page. Okay, so we've talked about grouping. What I'll do now is I'll talk a bit about benchmarking, which is one of my favorite features of Sharesight. Now, typically when we think about benchmarking as investors, I think it's sort of been drilled into our heads to look at, what the S&P 500 is doing, or what the ASX 200 is doing, or the All Ords, right? We're conditioned to think that way because we've seen it on television for decades. We've seen it in the newspaper for decades. What the S&P do, what the All Ords do, right? And when we talk like that, what we're actually talking about is we're actually only talking about the price return of those indices. And that's not to say they don't have value. It's a nice kind of quick hit, hey, how's the market going kind of thing. But they really don't tell you how you've done personally as an investor, right? And so what we do at Sharesight is we actually allow you to benchmark against other real investments. We prefer ETFs. The reason for that is that you can actually invest in an ETF, right? That is a true alternative to your own investment strategy. In an ETF, when it's tracked on Sharesight, it'll actually take out the fees as well when we do our pricing. So it's a true apples to apples comparison. And just to show you what I like to do here, so if we click add a benchmark, we have this list of common benchmarks here. Now these will be dictated by the country or by where you live when you set up your Sharesight portfolio. But what I like to do is I actually like to use something a bit different. In this case, I like to use a Vanguard diversified balanced ETF. And the reason I do that, I'll just add that and let it recalculate. The reason I do that is because it, like I said before, it presents a true alternative to my own investment sort of philosophy. I'm going to switch to not grouping just to clean up that chart a bit as well. So what you can see now straight away is the performance of my own investment decisions in that orange line. And then you can see the performance of the blue line there. And the balanced ETF I like because for me, I think of my benchmark as my own sort of autopilot investment solution, right? So I'm in my late 30s. I'm really busy running Sharesight, the company. I've got 2 kids under the age of 5. I don't have a lot of time. And there are times throughout the course of the year where I tend to go a bit hands-off in my own investment strategy. So if I have capital to invest, what I like to do there is kind of default to a diversified or a balanced index. It's not always balanced. Sometimes it's more on the growth end of things, but given the uncertainty in the market that we've seen, my own preference is for a balanced index. And so you can make use of any listed security really around the world to benchmark your portfolio against. So, if it's an ETF, if it's a managed fund, you can search in there and you should be able to find anything and benchmark your portfolio against that. And what we do behind the scenes is we assume a common start date and a common investment amount, which again, you can see there the convergence of these 2 lines back in August of 2019, and it'll push it forward from there. So it's a really powerful feature that I hope you give a try. Okay. The other thing that you may have noticed in my portfolio are these colored circles next to my holdings. This is a feature that we call labels. It's a really useful feature, and it allows you to add another layer of classification onto your portfolio. And so in this case, I've just done this for today as a very basic example. The purple labels are for US shares, the light blue labels are for my New Zealand shares, and the red labels are for my ASX shares. So what I like about that is currently, so we're not grouping here. We've got everything organized in one big table, but you can see that I've got another layer of classification apparent to me on the screen without having to leave the page and go do anything else. So I can quickly see that if I rank my positions here, you can see that actually my performance really is dominated by my US companies, at least for this example. So labels are a nice feature. To apply a label, by the way, what you want to do, go into the specific holding. So I'll just jump into Apple and go down here, and in the bottom right, there's a labels filter. And if you click manage labels, it'll take you to the manage labels area where you can assign the colors to each one of your companies. I should mention too, there's a lot of stuff you can do on the holding pages specifically. On the right-hand side too, in the detail panel here, you can actually customize this company into your own categories here, or you can actually reassign the industry classifications as well. And then at the bottom in holding settings, you've got a foreign withholding tax percentage that you can set. And if the company does offer a DRP plan, you can actually opt into the DRP plan in the holding settings box as well. So please take note of both the labels and the holding settings boxes within the holdings page at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. All right, now that is kind of the extent to what I do on the overview page. And truth be told, I spend most of my daily kind of, post-breakfast activity takes place on overview. The analogy we use at Sharesight all the time, it's like when you're getting your portfolio set up, that's when a lot of the most interesting stuff happens, right? You're sort of adding a lot of history, and you can see your portfolio come to life, and you can see your performance. You can add benchmarks. You can see all the distributions that come in and fill up the page. That's kind of like taking off in an airplane. And once you get all your data loaded in, and then once you turn on our feature to listen for those trade confirmations, that's sort of like when you're at cruising altitude, right? And so if you're on an airplane trip, the exciting parts are when you're taking off. When you're kind of at that cruising altitude and you're on autopilot and you're above the clouds, there's not much to see out the window, and there's not much to do really. The plane kind of just flies itself after there. So what I like to do is kind of jump from the overview page into the reports that I tend to use most. I suppose the one that I'll call out, just given the time of year for Australian listeners, if you are on the webinar, and again, that's kind of where I'm based, is the taxable income report, which can be thought of as the dividend or the distribution report as well. So I'll jump into that quickly, and I'll show you specifically a couple of features that are relevant for tax lodgement with the ATO for the Aussies. You can see here that you can change your time period on here as well. The report will break down your income as local income from non-trusts or companies, and then it'll show you trust income from ETFs or managed funds, and then it'll break out foreign income as well. Now, within this advanced options menu, there's a couple of things that are, quite frankly, they're a little bit buried. We're gonna work to actually surface these features a bit more. Show comments. So if you make a comment against the dividend that comes in, it'll appear in the table below. And show holding totals. That one does two very important things. One, it shows you the total income per company. So you can see here I have, what is that, 12 or 15 CBA dividends, and you can see I have a subtotal here, which is a nice, handy visualization. But the other thing that does is, go back, change this to last financial year. And again, this is 30 June, it's an Australian portfolio. Again, if I've got my show holding totals activated here, for those of you who own ETFs, you'll know that ETFs at tax time are a bit of a nightmare. And that's because of the complicated distributions that we receive from ETFs. They're not straight dividends. Each distribution in an ETF has all kinds of subcomponents, numbering anywhere from sort of 3 to even 20. You can imagine that if you own an ETF, you actually own all of the listed companies inside that ETF. And if they're getting yield from fixed interest, if they're getting local or overseas dividends, it actually creates a very complicated tax statement that we all get from the registry. It's known as the AMIT or the AMIT statement as well. So it's very, very complicated. And what we at Sharesight do to help you with this is we try to populate as much of the data we can that we receive directly from the ETF providers and the registries themselves. So throughout the course of the financial year, the ETF will pay distributions. These are kind of gross or estimated distributions. And what they do at the end of the financial year, after 30 June, is they come up with their finalized distribution totals. So what we do is we will go back and repopulate those distributions on your behalf based on the information, if we're getting that information from the providers or from the registries. But if we don't, and not everybody wants to sort of play ball and quite frankly serve the end investor, we've built a really handy tool that'll allow you to do this yourselves. And so you see this thing here, enter annual tax statement components. Click on that. This will allow you to enter the net amount received for each distribution component. And then what we'll do is we will then, on a prorated basis, populate each one of these columns throughout the course of the financial year to accurately match, or as accurately as possible, match what appears in your statement from the registry. We have about 350 professional partners using Sharesight as well. 3 of the big 4 accounting firms use Sharesight professionally for their own clients. We found that they really value this tool and they really haven't found any issues with it. So I guess what I'm saying is, if it's good enough for them, hopefully it'll be good enough for you as well. So that's kind of in the weeds, I suppose, but it's a really handy feature, particularly at this time of year. Okay, moving on to the next report that I want to highlight, that would be the diversity report. So this can also be thought of as the asset allocation report. This shows you the breakdown of your portfolio across, I guess, commonly understood classifications. So again, we have GICS, so that's industry and sector, country and market. But again, you can apply your own custom group here as well. So in this case, I'll select Doug's asset allocation, and you can kind of see how you're broken down across perhaps the way that you want your portfolio to be allocated. So, you know, in this case, the quick glance, okay, yeah, I'm happy. 67% of my portfolio is kind of in my core large cap, with another 13% of my core ETFs. And then I have kind of these remaining subcomponents allocated to these smaller slices of the pie. So just a nice way to apply your own, I guess, worldview across your portfolio. I should mention too that on all our reports, all the data is downloadable to Excel, PDF, or Google spreadsheet format up here at the top. Comes out in really nice formatted outputs as well if you'd like to share it with, you know, partner, advisor, accountant, what have you. All right. Then the final performance kind of report that I'd like to show is the contribution analysis report. I love this report. This is one of my favorites because what it does is it shows me the contribution or detraction that my own investment decisions have made on my bottom line, basically. So again, just like I just showed you, you can use any kind of setting in terms of grouping to look at your portfolio. In this case, we're looking at market, which doesn't really help us very much. You can see in this case, NASDAQ has given me 90% of my return over the past year to my portfolio. But what I like to do here is go to since inception, and I like to ungroup everything. So this shows me a company by company attribution analysis of my portfolio. Now you can see what's happened in this case is I put quite a few shares of Apple into this demonstration portfolio, and you can see that it's sort of really running away in terms of its contributed 68.36% to my total return. But this is really useful, right? This shows you kind of concentration risk as well, and where your positive and negative returns are coming from. And also you can quickly run down the list and see, you know, my only detractors have been Westpac and WIBO as well. So quite interesting to see actually WIBO falling into that blue. That's actually a bit of a surprise to me. But you can imagine if you've got kind of a less concentrated portfolio, running this report on an ungrouped basis since the inception of your portfolio is really powerful features because you can see the overall importance to your own investment decisions over time. A couple of other features just to highlight as well. In the settings menu, I mentioned before you can share portfolios. Typically what our customers do in this case is they share access with their accountant. And so if you go into settings and portfolio sharing, you can enter their name, their email address, and you can dictate the level of access that they have on the portfolio as well. So what I do for my accountant is I give them read and write access. That means that they can actually change trades. They can change distributions. They can actually make adjustments to all of the transactions in my portfolio. It's a really, really handy feature at tax time. We found that it does reduce kind of your ongoing, maintenance or data collection invoices that you probably receive from your accountants on an annual basis. Often the first question you get is, okay, I need a list of all the trades you've made. So if they've got access, they can just go, okay, reports, all trades, bang, right there. And they really shouldn't be going off and recreating, capital returns or losses, because all the information is right here for them, as well as for the distribution income as well. So that's a really handy feature come tax time too. Also, just on the accounting front, if your accountant uses Xero, as many in New Zealand and Australia now do, we have a really nice integration with Xero. We've run some specific webinars on this in the past. Have a look on our YouTube channel if you want to learn a bit more about this. But what most of our customers do with Xero is they're kind of a self-directed investor, right? They leave it their accountants to run Xero for them. This is exactly what mine does. What you can do, or actually preferably what your accountant can do if you give them access to the portfolio, they can connect the portfolio to your own Xero ledger that they maintain. So what that means is every trade that comes into Sharesight, every distribution, every dividend, every cost-based adjustment, every DRP, you name it, will flow from the broker into Sharesight and then on into Xero automatically in real time. So again, thinking about reducing cost and time at tax time, all the information as it pertains to your investment portfolio can just flow straight into the Xero account, which is a really, really, really good sort of way to reduce errors and reduce cost on the accounting side of things as well. So again, if you're not a Xero customer, if you don't use Xero, if you're not up to setting this up, that's totally fine. We'd encourage you to share access with the accountants and have them integrate your Sharesight portfolio, which they can do. Okay, and the final thing that I will mention is in terms of getting support on Sharesight. I mentioned this little chat widget down below. If you click that chat widget, our Sydney-based team will answer any questions you may have. I mentioned our YouTube channel previously as well. So if you go to youtube.com and just search for Sharesight, you'll find all of our recorded webinars and any kind of how-to videos that we posted there. Email us. Our contact information is in the help tab as well. There's a lot of good content on our blog. In addition to the top 20 trade infographics that we post, there's a heap of information on there. And then you can search for our help center here as well. So if you're looking for, how to apply labels or whatever it may be, chances are there'll be an article that has been written for it. Search for it and click on it, and you'll go to our relevant help page on the topic. And just finally, just glancing at my notes, I did forget to mention one thing. And I think my colleague Prashant will be running a webinar next week on sort of hidden tips and tricks of Sharesight, which will be a good one. But at the risk of stealing his thunder a little bit, one of the features that I really like, and that I think our customers really like as well, is the share checker, which is right here on the overview page. If you click share checker, what this will do, it'll allow you to run a hypothetical investment of $10,000 for any investment on our database. And so we track 30 different stock markets from around the world. We track managed funds. So chances are, if you're interested in tracking it or if you own it, you can whack it into the share checker and run this hypothetical assessment as well. And actually, one other thing that you can do in here, if you're somebody who does like to track sort of those traditional indices that I mentioned before, the S&P 500 or what have you, you can actually do that in here as well. So one thing that I'll just do, if you wanted to, so we've got ASX selected here. If you wanted to whack an XFJ, this is the financial sector of the ASX as an index. Do that. And what Sharesight does, it goes back and it invests $10,000, and you can go back as far as you want and just have a quick glance at the performance of whatever security you've entered into this little tool. It's a really handy tool. You can see that here, and then you can see some underlying information below as well. So just a really handy tool to help you check historical share prices and a sort of quick glance at anything that's useful for you in your own investment decision making. Right. So with that, that is how I use Sharesight. So, I guess my point really is that I spend a lot of my time here on the overview page. It's packed with features. It allows me to get up to speed immediately on what's been going on inside my account. And I hope that some of the stuff I've shared with you today has been helpful and has surfaced some of the features that you may not have been across as well. So what I'll do now is I'll just go to Q&A. Just the questions here. So somebody asks, that means I could have a US and Australian portfolio. Yes, you can. Absolutely. So what you'll notice here, just to show you this, this portfolio, core portfolio blue chips, if I go into settings, you can see tax residency of portfolio set to Australia. So that occurs when you set up Sharesight for the first time. You'll be asked to nominate a country. That will then nominate the country of your first portfolio. Then when you go on and you create additional portfolios, depending on your plan type, you'll be prompted to tell us what country you'd like the domicile to be. That country will domicile the currency and the various features that are available in that portfolio as well. So just to show you, if I just flick over to coronavirus, portfolio, I should say, settings, you can see this one is United States. And then if you run a consolidated view, which is available in this drop down here, you can combine those portfolios together, which is a very useful feature. Okay, somebody's asking to how they view and sort the weightings or allocation of shares. So I suppose the way to do this is just thinking out loud. If you run into diversity and you, let's say, do not group, again, do not group is a very useful feature. You can then, you have a list here of all the holdings, and you can just do a stack rank like that of the weighting of each investment. I realize too that the question asker has also said that that would be handy on the overview page too. Yeah, I can see how it would be. We get a lot of really good feedback for things that people want to see on the overview page. It's just a case of limited real estate, loading times, various other factors that go into our decision making around what does and does not appear here. No kind of feature promises at this time, but one thing we've discussed, at least at whiteboard level, is having more customizations around what columns of data appear on various reports. So I certainly hear you there, and I think it's a valid point to be sure. Somebody's asking, if I wanted to use this from this financial year, do I have to go back to the beginning of the investment, or can I take it up from 1st July? Yeah, that's a really good question. You kind of have an important decision to make, which is not set in stone. You can always go back and do this again regarding portfolio setup, and that is, how much history do I pull into my portfolio, right? So we have data that goes back to the late 1990s, so it's over 20 years now of daily share price and distribution data. So if you can imagine, if you go back to say 2001 and you import a portfolio or a spreadsheet from there on, that's great, because you're going to get a whole heap of actual transactional history imported into Sharesight, and we'll show you on a detailed basis your performance at any point in time. You'll see all the transactions, all the distributions. You can run every report throughout the lifetime of your trading history, presuming it's longer, not longer than say 22 years. The issue with that, though, from your own kind of sanity and administration purposes, is that if you do that, there's a whole lot of stuff that you ought to check in the intervening time from your first trade to today. And what Sharesight does is it'll create these little, what we call unconfirmed transactions. So just here's a random example for Clorox, a stock that's done very well in the coronavirus pandemic. Clorox has paid me 2 dividends, right? Any dividends that come into Sharesight are considered unconfirmed, because what we're trying to do there is we're trying to say to you, hey, look, this is what we think your dividend payment was, but you really should check your bank account to just confirm that it matches up exactly. If it doesn't, you can pop it open, you can make any adjustments and save it. But what I'm saying really is, if you go back 20 years, you can imagine the volume of data that you'd be forced to check, and we'd ask that you check to make sure that it's accurate. So that's kind of one way you can do that by importing a whole bunch of trading history. The other thing you can do, I'll just say import from a file, you can see here, this is kind of the fork in the road, if you will, that I spoke to earlier. You can import individual trades or opening balances. So what a lot of our clients do is that at 1 July, this is kind of getting back to the question, at 1 July, they will opt for an opening balance. So you'll know that from a statement you've received from your institution or from your accountant, and you'll know the opening balances. And so what you can then do, and I'll just take you through this just to show you just a hypothetical example. Let's just say we want to do Atlassian, pick a company. So if we're going to import Atlassian, we're going to add a trade for Atlassian, but I'll do an opening balance. It's going to ask you for your cost base, so 5,000, and it's going to ask you for quantity, right? And then it'll work out an average cost per share. But you can also see here that we know the market value of Atlassian at the time. And so that's where Sharesight will sort of take over and populate your performance history. But yeah, you can absolutely start from 1 July or whenever the first day of your respective financial year is and begin with opening balances, and Sharesight will sort of take over from there. Tempting as it is to add in all that history, it can create extra work for you depending on how much history you have in there. And if there are any kind of unconfirmed corporate actions or unhandled corporate actions that come in, if there's divestitures or takeovers or cost-based adjustments, that stuff can take quite a bit of time to get right and to sort out the paperwork and everything going back that far back into history. But yeah, really good question on getting things set up as well. We'd always encourage people too, if you're new to the system, the best thing to do is just do what I just did. Just click on add a holding and just whack something in manually. Have a play with buy trades, have a play with opening balance. You'll see it populate in the portfolio. You can always delete either the holding or the entire portfolio itself. So, again, it's kind of just software, right? You can kind of do whatever you like with it. And you can always sort of take it on a trial run. You can upload a file. You can even import from a broker if you want, from one of our broking partners. And you can set it up that way, delete it, and start over again once you're comfortable with the system. We always encourage people to get comfortable with the way we operate before they kind of fully commit to the product. All right. Well, that's it for the questions, everybody. And that takes us to about 45 minutes in total length. I guess I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining me today and for spending a bit of time with me today. I hope that was insightful. I hope you learned one or two things about how to get the most out of the software. And we wish you all the best and all the best in health as well. Thank you again.